All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on a secret ingredient in music. It's this hidden architecture, right? The thing that makes everything from these huge classical pieces to your favorite movie soundtracks sound so absolutely epic. So let's dive in.
You know that feeling when you're listening to a piece of music and it sounds like there are all these different melodies weaving in and out all at the same time? But it's not a mess, it just works perfectly. So how in the world do they do that? Well, the answer is this really cool technique called counterpoint.
So counterpoint, it literally just means note against note. And here's a cool way to think about it. Imagine you're in a room and a bunch of people are having these really interesting conversations all at once. But instead of being total chaos, everything they're saying somehow fits together to tell one bigger, way more awesome story. That's counterpoint in music.
Okay, so how do we actually build something like that? Well, like any masterpiece, you've got to start with the core ingredients.
All right, this is the #1 rule, the big one. In counterpoint, there are no backup singers. There are no side characters. Every single melody is a main character. Each one has to be so strong that if you pulled it out and listened to it all by itself, it would still be a complete, interesting piece of music. No exceptions.
Think about most of the songs you listen to, right? You've got the lead singer, who's obviously the star of the show, and then you have the background chords, kind of like the supporting cast. Well, counterpoint flips that script entirely. It's a team effort. Every single melody is a co-star sharing the spotlight, and when they all weave together, man, that's when you get something seriously complex and rich.
Okay, so to make sure all these co-stars actually sound good together and don't just clash, composers pay super close attention to something called intervals. And that's just a fancy word for the distance between two notes. Now, some intervals are consonant. They sound really stable, really pleasing. And then you have dissonant intervals, which sound tense, maybe a little edgy. It's that mix of stable and tense that really creates the emotion in the music.
All right, next up, the rules of the conversation. If our melodies are going to talk to each other, they need some ground rules so they don't just shout over each other.
So there are basically 4 ways these melodies can move in relation to each other. You've got parallel, oblique, similar, but the one that's really important is contrary motion. That's when one melody goes up in pitch and the other one goes down. Why is that so cool? Because that contrast is what helps our brains clearly hear them as 2 separate, independent voices, each doing its own thing.
Okay, let's talk about that tension again. That's where dissonance comes in. Those are the notes that sound a little crunchy, a little unstable. And honestly, it's the composer's secret weapon. It is literally a musical cliffhanger. It creates this tension that just makes your brain go, wait, what happens next? You're desperate for a resolution.
And that resolution, that answer you were craving, that's consonance. After all that crunchy tension, you get a sound that feels stable, calm. It's a release. It's the ah moment, the happily ever after. And this whole cycle, building tension with dissonance and then releasing it with consonance, that's what keeps music exciting and keeps us hooked.
So let's look at how this is built. As you can probably guess, this stuff is not easy. It takes a ton of practice. And for hundreds of years, composers have followed a really specific training plan to get good at it.
The whole process usually starts with something called a cantus firmus. It's Latin for a fixed melody, but don't worry about that. Just think of it like a blueprint or a foundation. A teacher hands a student this one simple, solid melody, and the student's entire job is to build a brand new, awesome melody right on top of it, making sure they work together. And this training is actually broken down into 5 stages, or species. You start at level 1, just writing one note against one note. Super simple. Then you level up, adding 2 notes against one, then 4, and so on. You slowly add more complex rhythms and rules until, at the final level, you can combine everything you've learned and write freely. It's kind of like going from learning your ABCs to writing an amazing story.
Now, while you're learning, there are a few classic mistakes you have to avoid. And the absolute biggest #1 no-no is something called parallel fifths and octaves. Here's why it's so bad. These particular intervals are so strong, so powerful, that when you move 2 melodies using them at the same time, our brains just merge them. We stop hearing 2 independent voices. We just hear one thick voice. And that completely destroys the whole point of counterpoint, which is to have that conversation between separate parts.
A few other common errors. Making these huge, awkward leaps in your melody. That's a bad look. Or letting the voices cross over, so the low melody ends up higher than the high one. Gets confusing. And a really big one is forgetting that the bass line is your foundation. If that lowest part isn't solid, the entire piece of music just feels wobbly. Okay, so this stuff started ages ago, right? And you might be sitting there thinking, this is just some old, dusty music theory. But you'd be wrong. This technique is totally alive and well, and I guarantee you hear it all the time without even realizing it.
Seriously, counterpoint is everywhere. Of course, it's all over classical music, but it's also a massive part of what makes film scores and video game music sound so epic. Ever notice in a big movie when the hero's theme and the villain's theme are playing at the same time, like they're musically fighting each other? Guess what? That's counterpoint. And you'll even hear it pop up in some really clever pop and rock songs.
So at the end of the day, learning counterpoint is way more than just memorizing a bunch of rules. It is a full-on workout for a musician's brain. It teaches you how to balance different ideas, how to organize your thoughts, and how to solve really creative problems. It's a fundamental skill that will make you a better musician, period. Doesn't matter what style of music you're into.
So I've got a challenge for you. The next time you put on your headphones or listen to a movie soundtrack, I want you to really listen. Listen deeper than you normally do. Can you hear the different melodies? Can you pick out that secret conversation happening just under the surface? Give it a try.